We're approaching 12 years since the release of Man of Steel, which means 12 years since the last Superman movie. Walter Hamada, can you explain why there's been no Superman film for so long despite the fact he's an inspiration to kids all over the world?
Fuck them kids.
Welcome to Warping Fist.
When creating a cinematic universe, you need to plan out every film that will release, as each movie needs to interconnect and build up to form a larger narrative. However, very few cinematic universes have managed to pull this off successfully. The DCEU, also known as the DC Extended Universe, is one of these universes that was handled very poorly due to the general incompetence from many executives involved. They never had a concrete plan, leading to several disconnected films and an overall non-existent storyline. If the MCU and the Monsterverse were prestigious cars found in Dubai, then the DCEU is that one car given to you by your creepy alcoholic uncle.
But I got a slight dent in the back. You give me $7,000, all you gotta do.
Just like how rappers can't commit to one family, the DCEU would greenlit dozens of films, but due to poor management, many of these projects would never see the light of day. Let's take a look at the majority of the cancelled DCEU movies to see how this universe may have been like if handled properly.
Dude, we need to get out of here. I just saw Batman in the next building over.
Chill out, bro. Even if it's Arkham Batman, all he's going to do is knock us out and leave.
Bro, it ain't Arkham Batman. It's Zack Snyder's Batman.
Wait, are you sure it's Zack Snyder's Batman? It's not Matt Reeves' Batman?
Yes, I'm sure. I don't think he's noticed us yet, so we still have a chance to escape. He's right behind me, isn't he?
The Snyder-era DC films refers to the original slate of films before Warner Brothers changed the overall creative direction of the universe. These films are what would have released if Snyder and other filmmakers at the time were allowed to make their films without any interference. And if you take a look at the types of films that were being released during this era, they were considerably darker, perfectly reflecting the types of films the DCEU was releasing in its early years. In 2015, Ben Affleck would be in talks to direct a Batman film based off his version of the character. The script would be developed by himself and Jeff Johns, and the story would have been a thriller and action film centering on Batman facing off against Deathstroke, who's been systematically destroying his life. The story would take Batman to many iconic locations like Arkham Asylum and eventually culminate in an epic battle against Deathstroke. The film went through a decent amount of development, as not only was there a cinematographer attached to the project, but even storyboards were also made for the film. The script was also said to be amazing by many people involved. Unfortunately, due to several circumstances going on in Ben Affleck's life, he would ultimately drop out of directing the film. However, he also felt that the film script was not as good as it could have been. With Ben Affleck leaving the directing chair, Matt Reeves would come in as his replacement. Originally, Reeves did fully intend on directing a Batman film with Ben Affleck in the role. However, the film would not adapt his script, but instead be a brand new story centering on Batman uncovering a mystery within Gotham that ties to his family legacy. Around the time this version of the film was being developed, there were rumors that it would be a prequel film set in the 1990s and would be narrated by Ben Affleck. It's worth noting that information on this version of Ben Affleck's Batman is completely unknown and will likely never release, as when Ben Affleck dropped out of the project, Matt Reeves would be forced to rework the story and center it on a younger Batman in a new franchise reboot. Nightwing was set to be a DCEU film focusing on the famous Batman character and was set to be directed by Chris McKay. As we all know, Dick Grayson is dead within the DC Extended Universe, which either means two things. This film was a prequel, set before Grayson was killed by the Joker. 2. Grayson's death was retconned by Chris McKay. Or 3. The story would center on Dick Grayson coming back to life, akin to the Red Hood. Questions aside, the script for this film would be put on hold, as Warner would eventually lose interest in the project. Chris McKay states that if the film were ever to return, it would be reworked to exist outside the DCU continuity.
Stripped down movie with, a different point of view of Batman. You're seeing a guy who grew up under Batman's tutelage, who's now an adult. It's a father and son story, and it's a story about a father that might have been a difficult from Dick's point of view.
The character Deathstroke was set to be the primary antagonist of Ben Affleck's Batman film, and according to Joe Manganiello, his motivations to fight Batman stems from a fateful event that took place in their past. This past would have been briefly delved into in this Batman film. However, it would have taken center stage in the unmade Deathstroke film, directed and written by Gareth Evans, with a story provided by Joe Manganiello. This unmade Deathstroke film would have dived into elements of the character's past, and according to Gareth Evans, it would have been inspired by Korean noir films, especially how dark and grim those movies can be. The film would have explored Deathstroke's time within the League of Assassins and explore his early encounters with Batman, and based off Gareth Evans' past experience with action films, we know this Deathstroke film would have blessed us with visceral action scenes. Unfortunately, the project would be cancelled, as Warner Brothers had little interest in the project. Ray Fisher's Cyborg served as the heart of Zack Snyder's Justice League, and it was only a matter of time until he received his own film, a film that was originally part of the DCEU's original slate of films. The development of this film carried on for several years, and Ray Fisher would express hope for either Zack Snyder or Rick Famuyiwa to direct the project. Unfortunately, due to the failure of Justice League and Ray Fisher's bad experience working with Warner Brothers, this Cyborg film would never see the light of day.
Relax. There was an accounting error. We said it.
I'll double it for being a dickhead. You got 10 seconds.
Deadshot is probably the best character in the first Suicide Squad film, so it makes sense that on December of 2016, a Deadshot film would be announced, with Will Smith returning to the role. However, due to Will Smith being unable to return due to scheduling conflicts, this film would naturally be shelved. Despite Suicide Squad being a critical failure, it was a massive financial success. This, of course, would warrant several spin-off projects based on the characters, especially Harley Quinn. WB and actress Margot Robbie would begin brainstorming many ideas for her next adventure. They landed on Gotham City Sirens as the perfect property to adapt, a comic in which Harley plays a main role, and David Ayer would be hired as the director of the film. Geneva Robertson would be hired as the writer for the film, and in the months since the film's announcement, David Ayer would tease many elements of the film, such as a cryptic image of Black Mask and Joker, who would have likely played a role in the story, directly tying to the scene from Suicide Squad. So why didn't this film happen in the end? Well, Margot Robbie said in an interview that she decided to do Birds of Prey first in order to introduce the world to the lesser-known characters of the group. David Ayer had never officially left the project, instead claiming that the project was put on hold for the time being, but it's obvious it's not happening anytime soon. Man of Steel was developed as a singular Superman story. However, it laid the seeds for an expansive DC universe, eventually culminating in a Justice League film. However, there was meant to be more than one Justice League film, in the form of Justice League Part 1 and 2, an epic 2-part storyline that acted as the conclusion to the DC Cinematic Universe. Part 1 would have explored Lex Luthor enacting a plan to destroy the Justice League, eventually ending in Superman being corrupted by the anti-life equation. Part 2 would focus on the remaining members of the Justice League attempting to save the world by sending Flash back in time, eventually ending in a climactic battle for the whole universe. Now the story for these two films sounds epic and would have been one of the greatest blockbuster films in terms of action and stakes. Snyder worked hard to bring the storyline to life. However, due to several circumstances, WB would move away from Snyder's envisioning of the DCEU, which directly led to these Justice League films being cancelled. Green Lantern Corps was one of the many films part of the original DCEU slate of films. Written by David Goyer and Justin Rhodes, the film is said to have focused on Jon Stewart and Hal Jordan in a buddy cop film similar to Lethal Weapon. The project would be developed for a few years, however, it would eventually be quietly shelved. A few years later, Christopher McQuarrie would begin developing his own version of the film, which connected to a Superman movie he was also developing. However, once again, the film would be cancelled due to a lack of interest from Warner Brothers. However, Greg Berlanti would then begin producing his own Green Lantern project, but this time, it would be a TV series centering on multiple Green Lanterns, and it was described as an epic saga spanning several years. This project would also be cancelled. Among every cancelled DCEU film, The Flash has the messiest history when it comes to cancelled films. Warner began developing a Flash movie for the DCEU all the way back in 2014, and many directors have been attached to the project. Seth Grahame-Smith was the first director to helm the project, and the film would serve as his directorial debut. However, after he dropped out of the project due to creative differences, a new director, Rick Famuyiwa, would take over. Famuyiwa at the time seemed to be a great pick to adapt the film. Not only was he an acclaimed director, known for his indie movies, but his vision for the film was supposedly compatible with the script that was written by Seth Grahame-Smith. This version of the film went pretty far into development. Not only was the script completed by Famuyiwa, but he also began casting many actors in lead roles, such as Kiersey Clemons as Iris West, Billy Crudup as Henry Allen, and Ray Fisher as Cyborg. They were also set to begin filming in London in 2016. Unfortunately, Famuyiwa would leave the project due to creative differences. The director had envisioned The Flash as a darker film with edge, while Warner saw the project as something more lighthearted, leading to this creative clash. After Famuyiwa dropped out of the project, many other directors would express interest, and the film would also undergo several rewrites. In January 2018, John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein would become attached as the film's new directors, which hints that the film was leaning for a more lighthearted and comedic tone. Ezra Miller, who disagreed with the creative direction of the film, would team up with Grant Morrison to create another script to convince Warner to shift to a new direction for the film. Not much is known about this version of the story, but it was supposedly darker and inspired by Back to the Future. Eventually, Warner would shut down both versions of the Flash movie. Although Suicide Squad was a major critical failure, it made enough at the box office to justify a sequel. Warner began searching for a director for Suicide Squad 2 shortly after the first film released. Mel Gibson, Ruben Fleischer, David S. Goyer, John Collette-Serra, and others were considered for directing. However, due to constant delays with the script, none of these candidates ever helmed the project. However, in September of 2019, Gavin O'Connor would officially be hired to direct the film. The story would be co-written by him and many other screenwriters. Although it was never confirmed, it was rumored that Black Adam would serve as the villain of the film. According to rumors, the Suicide Squad would be sent into hostile territory in order to retrieve a weapon of mass destruction, which would turn out to be Black Adam or another major DC character like Supergirl. One other element that would have been present in this film is Deathstroke, who would have faced off against Deadshot in the film, with Joe Manganiello reprising his role. Now it's important to know that several versions of the story were created for this Suicide Squad film, so the actual film may have been completely different from the rumors. In the end, this Suicide Squad film would be cancelled for two reasons. One was scheduling conflicts, as many actors were tied up with different projects. Second is that according to Gavin O'Connor, the studio wanted the film to be more lighthearted and comedic when compared to the original dark approach. The Justice League Dark are one of the more niche but incredibly popular superhero teams in comics. One of the elements that makes them so compelling is both how they don't really classify as traditional superheroes. Second is that they encompass and deal with the more supernatural and horror side of the DC universe. It was very exciting when in 2013, the famous horror and thriller director Guillermo del Toro was attached to direct the Justice League Dark film. We don't know much about the story of this project, but we do know that del Toro borrowed elements from many comic stories and featured characters like Constantine, Swamp Thing, Zatanna, Deadman, and many others. Unfortunately, del Toro would drop from the film and a new director, Doug Liman, would take over. The script would be rewritten several times and the story would be titled Dark Universe. Unfortunately, once again, the director would leave the project due to scheduling conflicts, and the film would undergo several changes once again. The film would later be reimagined as a TV series produced by J.J. Abrams. During the development of Batman v Superman, Snyder was responsible for formulating the origin stories of several DC characters, especially the big three members of the Justice League. Superman's origin was already established in Man of Steel, and Batman's past is heavily hinted towards in Batman v Superman. Wonder Woman's past is a bit more cryptic in the film, but that would be resolved once her solo film released, giving us a full glimpse of Wonder Woman's origin story. However, there's a chance we could have had something completely different. During the early development of Batman v Superman, Snyder had a unique envisioning of Diana's early journey. You see, originally Diana left Themyscira to hunt down Ares, but instead of being involved in World War I, the story would see Wonder Woman tracking down Ares for hundreds of years. Diana would involve herself in many wars throughout history, believing that she would track down Ares eventually in one of these conflicts. Eventually, she would become a part of the Crimean War. There, she would recruit many different warriors from different nationalities and cultures to help in her battle against the God of War. Diana in this version of the film was said to be way more ruthless and brutal when compared to her more compassionate self we're used to. This is demonstrated by the many heads she's holding in the image. Eventually, Diana would meet Steve Trevor, who would force her to change and embrace her more compassionate side. Now, this envisioning of the original Wonder Woman film was very unique. However, it's considerably darker than most Wonder Woman stories out there. Patty Jenkins and Michelle McLaren seem to have the same feelings, as they both refused to direct the film when offered, as they believed that this version of the story was too dark and brutal, and Wonder Woman should not be so cold-hearted. Eventually, when Patty Jenkins was hired as the director, she would have the story reworked to instead take place during World War I. The dark and brutal elements would be toned down as well. However, it's clear that a few elements from the original envisioning did make it into the final film.